I'll call our finance committee meeting for September 15th, 2025 to order. Roll call, please.
Sorry. Jack Heineman.
Here.
Start it over. Jack Heineman,
Here.
Paul Cardarella,
Here.
Chris Zellner,
Here.
Tom Wilson,
Here.
Sarah Whitley, Al Dasso, Kristen Runge.
Okay, so we have four, which makes our quorum to start with, and it sounds like we will have one person joining us shortly. So we will get started. First thing we have is minutes.
I'll move we approve the minutes as presented.
We have a motion and a second. Any other comments? Call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Presentation of updated financial management plan by Ellers and Associates. And we have Todd Taves here with us from Ellers.
Thank you. See if I can.
Kristen is not joined.
I'm unmuted. Well, good afternoon. Again, I'm Todd from Ellers. I've got my colleague Casey Griffiths with us. Casey's supporting my work with the village and joined us about a year and a half ago, formerly the city administrator in the city of Cudahy most recently. Enoch Gallery. So in 2020, the village engaged Ellers to create a financial management plan, and we've updated that each year since. And the purpose of the meeting this afternoon is for me to give you a briefing on the update, most current update to the model. Big picture, the financial management plan is intended to be a forward-looking projection of the village's budget. Budgeting is often a very incremental exercise. You look at the prior year's budget, you make some adjustments, and this is intended to really get away from that just 1 year forward-looking perspective and to look out a number of years. A couple reasons why is sometimes there are things that can present opportunities as well as challenges. And if you know when those things are on the horizon, it's easier to plan for them when you're predicting them rather than just dealing with them when they're right in front of you. I'll also provide sort of a roadmap so that that budgeting follows a more regular cadence where you already have a roadmap on where you're going and can make some of those decisions relative to things like capital projects and staffing in advance of that annual cycle. The budgets will always, of course, be approved annually. The board will make adjustments as needed, but having that roadmap can be helpful. So the way we we'll walk through this is take a quick snapshot of your credit profile as measured by Moody's Investors Service. It's always nice to have a third-party opinion or an outside opinion of what you look like to the investor community. And quite literally, they give you a financial scorecard, which we'll take a look at. We'll talk about some of the assumptions that are in the model. I'll give you a projection of the tax rate and the tax levy. We're going to talk specifically this afternoon about levy limits, which is probably the one item that the village will have to contend with in the next couple of years. And then I'll provide a few wrap-up comments. I'm going to move through the material relatively quickly, so at any point, feel free to stop me if something I've covered needs some more explanation or if you have questions. And Renee, Todd, feel free to jump in as well if you want to elaborate on something. Visually, and this is a spreadsheet model that we provide to Renee, which she looks over and which we update each year, but it all focuses around forecasting out that tax levy and that tax rate, looking at the impacts on fund balance if we choose to use that. And then in the upper right-hand corner, again, those levy limits. What goes into the model is we take your 10-year capital improvement plan. We do a 10-year look on your debt forecast, but a 5-year look on the operating side. We forecast out any governmental fund that has a levy component to it so that we're capturing all those pieces. And we also make a projection of the value growth within the village. So that again feeds into that tax rate component as well as your debt capacity utilization. So let's talk a little bit about that Moody's perspective that I mentioned. So the village borrowed last year, but because your audit wasn't done at that point and we had a full rating in 2023, that was the last time that Moody's published a full credit report. And so at that time, the village was rated a AA2. You can see the rating scale. This is what we refer to as investment grade. There are ratings that go lower than this. This is what we would consider the typical spectrum of municipal ratings. So AAA at the top, and then we've got the high grade and upper medium grade. So again, village overall, as well as your general obligation debt, is rated AA2. As is normally the case, utility secured debt is a notch lower in the case of sewer. That actually went from A1 to AA3 in conjunction with that September 2003 report. And then the water and the electric revenue stands at an A1, and that was affirmed just this past May when the utility issued revenue bonds. So from a grading scale, that's where you sit. It's always insightful to look at the actual credit report, and I've excerpted what Moody's views as the strengths and the challenges for the village. They always list strengths and challenges. In your case, the challenges I would say are relatively modest compared to some municipalities. So on the strength side, it's the local economy, the fact that you're in Dane County near the city of Madison. You've got significant reserves, which are also sufficiently liquid. With respect to the utilities, utility rates are set at a level that is providing a strong coverage on your debt service. And at least with respect to the sewer revenue, that authority to set rates lies with the village board. On the challenges side, again, we've got that 10-year CIP. We share that information with Moody's. So from their perspective, a challenge is, and while I would say it's a moderate challenge, is they do recognize that there is more borrowing that will take place in the future to keep up with infrastructure needs, notably the police station, which is a significant expenditure, but also a generational facility. On the utility side, the system overall is relatively small. And then lastly, the village does not have direct rate setting authority over the water or electric rates. From a credit perspective, that's considered a challenge. Not that the PSC doesn't do a good job of approving rates where they need to be set, but they see that additional layer of approval as something that is a challenge from a credit perspective. The most insightful portion of yeah.
On here, I think it's the next slide.
Yeah, I scrolled one too far.
It says that one of the challenges is a concentration among customers for the sewer utility. Are there a couple of them that show up in your report that are really? I know I was on the commission for MMSD, and DeForest was one of our customers, and they had a problem with one of their customers had to kind of shut down. I think it was Little Potato Company, but I'm not sure. It was one of those. And the money that they were then collecting went way down, and so it did the fall to MMSD, which affected a bunch of different things. Are there a couple companies that we have that with that same kind of problem here? Or?
It would be in the offering document, which I don't have pulled up here, but
I don't quite remember. I don't think it was super significant of a customer.
If you don't remember, then it's probably not like that.
Yeah, I don't think
20% of their sewer.
Yeah, and I can try and pull up the document, but I don't think.
No, don't worry about it, because if you can't think of it, then it's not like a 20.
In the audit report, they have to disclose over 5%, I believe it is, and I think there's one that's over 5%. But I don't think it rises very much higher than
that. Answers my question.
Yeah, as I mentioned, they're required to have a certain number of strengths and a certain number of challenges in the credit opinion. So, again, when I look at this, I don't see concerns here. These are, I guess, good issues to have in that part of the ledger.
Right. Thank you.
A number of years ago, Moody's actually literally puts a scorecard into your credit report. So they grade you on the various metrics that go into the rating. So those metrics are listed on the left-hand side, and then your rating is on the far right-hand side. You can see the weighting and then the analytical in terms of what the measure it is. And if you're interested, we can certainly forward you the whole report that goes into more detail. But you'll notice on that far right-hand column, all but 2 of them are actually reflective of a AAA credit, which would be the highest rating possible. The scorecard, just from a pure output standpoint, indicates that the village would be rated a AA1. Now, they don't go solely by the scorecard. It's the starting point. They have a credit committee that gets together. They look at it. They kind of factor in some intangible things, and they also look at peers and medians across the country. And so in this case, they notch that down to a AA2. But what this tells us is that your metrics are really, as opposed to things that can be a drag on the rating, your metrics are really wanting to elevate your rating. So again, from a credit perspective, the village is in a good position. The 2 that are not AAA, the institutional framework, what they mean when they say institutional framework, it's really the state statutes, the PSC, it's everything you operate under from a constraints and limitation standpoint. And every municipality in the state of Wisconsin is a AA on institutional framework, and that is because of levy limits. So Moody's looks at it, and because you don't have unfettered ability to set the levy, they look at that as less than a top tier. So you can't do anything about that AA. On the other one, long-term liabilities ratio, this is a combination of debt and pension. Wisconsin municipalities, by and large, are participants in the Wisconsin retirement system, which is one of the best funded plans in the country. And so your pension component of that is very minimal. This is really the one that the focus is on debt, both the long-term liabilities ratio and the fixed cost ratio. And what this is saying is that, you're a notch below AAA on that. So that kind of goes back to that credit challenges. If you borrow more, that puts more pressure on that. Borrow less, it's less pressure. You'd have to get to 300% on that to put you down to a AA level on that metric. And again, the rating is comprised of all these with the weighting. So no one thing is going to drive your rating entirely. But again, I just show this because the village financially and from a credit perspective is in really good shape. So that's how the outside world looks at the village from a credit perspective. The next 4 or 5 slides talk about the assumptions that go into the spreadsheet model. One of the first things we need to do is project out your valuation. We do that for purposes of forecasting tax rate. We also need to understand how you stack up with your CIP versus your statutory and self-imposed borrowing limits. For purposes of the model, we look at your 5-year historical numbers for both economic change and then new construction, or in other words, real growth. So that 2.55% annually for economic change, 1.79% for real growth or new construction, that's 50% of what you've actually grown at for the last 5 years. The other thing we take a look at, we do annual updates to your tax increment district cash flows over the next 10 years. You've got 5 districts which we anticipate closing. So we forecast out those closures, and then we show that value being added back to what's referred to as your TID out tax base. So the village has a TID in number, a TID out number, because revenues collected for tax increment districts go into a special fund and are used for TIF projects. We're most focused on that TID out number. The TID in number is relevant for your debt capacity. The TID out number is what we focus on for projecting tax rate impact. All of the TID closures are based on the most recent modeling, and they also assume that in each case, the village board will vote to approve or extend the life of the TID for 1 year for purposes of receiving 1 more year of collection for affordable housing. So if the board opts not to do that, that impact would move up 1 year earlier in the model, but we want to be conservative and assume each TID will remain open for 1 additional year. For each governmental fund that has a levy component, we need to make assumptions as to how much expenditures will go up in each year of the forecast. So we have a lot of different line items in the village budget, so we kind of lump these together with these codes. So you can see the percentages we've assumed, fairly modest on wages at 2% and insurance at 3%. The reality is if you put very large numbers in here, it really creates an issue with the levy limits. So again, this is just a longer term projection. Your actual budget document that comes forward for 2026 will be based on more current information. This is a multi-year average in each case. We don't show revenues up here because we're very conservative on the revenues. We generally assume revenues will remain flat.
I just wanted to jump in here. We started this model a number of months ago. So the 4%, like for health, dental, life, at the last board meeting, we talked about it's going to be more like 7.5%. But hopefully we'll be able to, do some other things that will bring the levy down or, where it needs to be. But I just wanted to say that, again, these are the assumptions that are used for the multi-year projections. So our overall target has been 4% for those increases. I just know that this year it's going to be, for 2026, that particular line item will be higher. But again, so right now we're in a process. We're supposed to get our second proposal tomorrow on whether we're staying with our insurance company or not. We have not seen huge increases. Currently we're part of this, the League Municipal Insurance, forget the whole name of it.
Sorry, go ahead.
League of Wisconsin Municipalities Mutual Insurance Company. But we are soliciting the other CIVMIC, which is the other large company that does Wisconsin municipality insurance. So we'll see where we land, but that has been pretty realistic for us. In wages, again, we've kind of left it when we do these projections about 2%, though we'll probably be proposing something higher in the budget that comes out for 2026.
And we can talk as we get a little further in about what the implications are if things are higher or less.
But we have to set some assumptions.
Right. The other thing we build in is we assume that the village budget will need to include additional staff positions as the village continues to grow. So Renee provided me an estimate. So the way to interpret this means that in next year's budget, there would be positions added that have total wage and benefit costs of about $500,000 per year. These numbers are, so the 717 and 27, that includes the 507 and then about $200,000 more. So it's not this isn't the amount added each year. This is a running total of what those new positions would be, so that by the year 2030, we've got roughly $1 million more in the village budget than we have in the present base year.
And again, just to comment on that, so that in 2026, originally when we did this, the department heads had proposed 5.5 new FTEs, and I think it'll only be maybe 5 or 4.5 now after we're actually working on the 2026 budget. And by the end of year 2030, that would be a total of about 10 FTEs in those 5 years, cumulative. So like there's currently no proposed hires in 2029. That's why the dollar amount stays the same. So if that kind of makes sense. Again, none of these, well, I guess a couple for 2026 or one, at least the police SRO was already approved by the village board, but otherwise, these other ones will be subject to board approval during the budget process.
The next input is the village.
Todd, can I ask a quick question for Renee? So based on that last slide, if you can go back to it, in 2026, you said we're going to add 5 people. The average is about 100,000 employee
That
with all
including
benefits
benefits,
and everything.
everything. Yep, that's wages and all benefits, assuming family health insurance and yeah, wherever on the pay scale they would be brought in. So that's the all-in kind of number, again, estimated.
A lot going on this, but really the only important number on here we wanted to include this for is that we factor in the 10-year CIP. And what this shows is that, and this includes the current budget year, so basically 11 years, you've got 72 million in project costs within your capital plan. And in terms of how we fund that in the model, and as we get a little further, I'll talk about 2 variations of the model, but in the model I'm talking about now, we assume you're going to continue your current practice of paying for roughly half of your capital projects with levied cash. So if you look at the 72 million, which is replicated in the top portion of this exhibit, above that you can see the various funding sources. The very top number, roughly 37 million, would be debt finance, so about half, with the balance coming from other cash sources, and again, including an annual capital levy. Just foreshadowing a little, one of the things that the village has working in its advantage with respect to levy limits is that for many years now, you've had a cash levy for capital built into your base levy. And what we'll see here in a few moments is that, as we forecasted in prior models, is going to get squeezed out here over the next few years, which means that you will not be able to levy as much for capital in order to accommodate growth in your operating budget, which will then necessitate moving more to a debt finance mix versus relying on that roughly 50% cash in the base model. The next slide shows the impact of existing debt as well as future debt. So kind of working from left to right, we've got in the blue existing debt only. The first column is the total of the principal and interest due each year on your general obligation debt. Some of that is allocated to TIDS. We also earn interest on fund balance within the debt service fund, and you also have a plan to apply some of the monies in that fund balance. And we then come up with a net debt service levy. In other words, far left is what you owe. Net debt service levy near the middle of the exhibit is what you actually have to put in the budget and levy for. And then in the yellow, on a forward-looking basis, we add in an estimate of that future debt. So this goes back to that prior slide. It's that 30+ million in funding over the next decade that would be required to support that version of the CIP. And then we come up with a total net debt service levy, existing debt and new debt. If you look in that levy change from prior year, what you'll see is that in 2027, we've got over a $700,000 projected increase, and that is the impact of borrowing for the police station in next year's debt issuance. So we're gonna see a one-time large increase that will bump that debt levy up to a higher level, and then we structure the debt in a way to try to make that annual future increase roughly level. So we've got roughly 135,000 increase required each year after that larger jump for the 27 budget. Where you see it start to go down in the year 2037, that's just the end of the 10-year capital improvement plan. There will be likely more borrowing in those out years. So when you get past 2020 or 2036, there's not as much value in looking at the years beyond that. But the long and short of it is a large increase in 27 and then roughly 130,000 per year each year thereafter to maintain the CIP that you have.
Was that police department borrowing or for the public works department?
Is it police or public works? I thought it was police.
We've already borrowed for the police.
Yeah.
So that's the public works facility. Okay. My
Right,
mistake.
yes, we borrowed for the police one in 2024. So 2026 is when we'll borrow for the proposed public works expansion.
Oh, that's okay. So that's the, I'm just looking here. That's this 10 million
Yeah.
here. Okay. So it's a $10 million project. From a debt capacity utilization under the Wisconsin Constitution, you're limited to having no more general obligation debt principal outstanding than is equal to 5% of your total equalized value. You have a policy that further limits the village to 1/2 of what the state would allow. So the yellow portion of the exhibit factors in both, again, existing debt as well as this prospective debt. So under this projection, you would peak out next year, and again, that includes that public works facility borrowing. You'd be at about 1/4 of the state limit, and you'd be at roughly 1/2 of your self-imposed limit. We then, see those numbers go down as you pay off existing debt. And again, we've got kind of that large bump up due to the capital facility project. Same holds true for this exhibit once we get past 2036. This again shows continued decrease, but we would have additional debt. But generally speaking, as the tax base continues to get larger, the debt capacity becomes less and less of a impact. When we roll up all the various assumptions, we come up with a all-in projected levy, and that's the yellow bar. So for the current budget year, your all-in levy was about 14.1 million. You can see the breakout in the lines above that, largest fund being the general fund, but you also have a levy component to the senior center, the village center, the capital projects, equipment replacement, and then we break out existing debt service and then a line for the new debt. What this shows is that by the 2030 budget year, we would be up to roughly close to $20 million. The most useful way we think to look at this is the taxes on an average home. We've got it also expressed as an equalized tax rate and an assessed tax rate. As we know, we've got revaluations when we talk about assessments, so that rate can jump around. But what we do within the model is we assume that average home is going to go up in value by that same level of economic appreciation that we assume in the overall model. So we're not keeping that flat, we're building that in. And what this shows is that, we would be roughly 2470 by the final year. We see a little bit of up and down from year to year, but generally speaking, we're, staying within about a $200 range with taxes on the average home. And again, this supports those new staffing hires. It supports that 10-year CIP. Just graphically, this shows where that levy is used. So again, no surprise, general fund, the orange is the largest portion. All the other levy supported governmental funds are the yellow portion. Green pays off that existing debt, and then the purple would be the principal and interest due on that prospective debt through the 5-year planning period. We look at it from a levy and rate standpoint. Again, that rate, from my perspective, is a less useful measure because it jumps around. The big decrease you see from 25 to 26 is an impact of the revaluation, but the orange bar, the more reliable measure, shows you where that levy goes over the projection period.
And if in the packet, the graph was
Not updated from 2 years ago.
So this is the correct graph.
Correct.
So the printouts and what was in the packet was a little bit different.
So this is the main point we want to spend a little bit of time on, and this is consistent with the models we've run the last several years. And the village is reaching the point where the growth in your operating budget is going to cause you to start exceeding the levy limit if you were able to continue levying for capital as you have done historically. So the orange bars represent that projected levy. The yellow line represents the maximum amount you can levy under the levy limit law. And the village should be fine for 2026. It will be very close for 2027, but by 2028, we will start to run over that limit as it's projected. And when I mentioned that, you've got something working for you, it's that you have a pretty substantial capital levy that has been built into the village's budget for many years. So in 2025, for example, you had just over 2.1 million. Part of your levy used to cash fund projects. The numbers below that through the 5-year period are what you would intend to use for levy numbers if you were not subject to the limit. In the levy limit capacity column, we show what the model indicates you could actually support from a levy limit standpoint. So starting in 2028, you'd like to levy 2,310,000. We show that you can only levy 2,010,000, which means that roughly 300,000 you'd either have to scale back your capital improvement plan, or you would need to borrow that 300,000 on top of the borrowing that's already included in the model. And then the next 2 years after that, that gets larger. Again, we only look out 5 years, but if you look at roughly the number, about $500,000 per year, that 1,350,000 in 2030, that's going to get you 2 or 3 more years beyond what this projection shows. So by the time the village gets to the 2033 budget, you probably will no longer be able to have a capital levy. At that point, that's when you are looking at things like referendums, other revenue sources, unless the law were to change between now and then. The good news is, you've got a number of years before you will be in that situation. And again, that's the value of the model, is looking out and understanding when this is going to create an issue for the village and being able to think about that and plan for that. Yes.
So when you go from 300,000 to 470, are we just adding 270?
Yes.
Or
Well, the 470 is what would have to be borrowed additionally for the
So every
2029
year-
budget year.
so every year you're 300,000, 470,000, 1.1 million.
Correct.
Your operating goes up, you have less capacity for planned.
Yeah.
For a planned capital levy, but therefore your numbers go.
The other way to think about this is in 2028, that 300,000 that we're borrowing for within the levy limit is now funding operations. So in 2030, we're using $1 million more of levy capacity to support operations versus, a capital levy.
Thank you.
So we ran a second version of the model. That would be that center column, levy limit compliant. And what we show is the levy that's required to support each model. 27, it's roughly the same. That's just, we're just touching that levy limit slightly. And then 28, 29, and 30, you'll notice that the levy actually goes down. And the reason is that if we take money out of what was previously the cash levy, and we now fund that variance of projects with debt, you're going to pay for that project over whatever term of debt it's issued for. And so in that respect, you actually have a smaller levy than if you were funding it with cash. Now we're making the assumption for modeling purposes that you will spread those payments out over a longer term. We can structure the debt any way the village desires. So if, it gets into the whole question of paying less interest versus affordability. But if you wanted to maintain that philosophy that we would like to minimize interest and pay for as much as we can with, effectively levy dollars. For example, in the year 2030, we could simply structure debt so that there was $1 million more principal due in that year. And then these would be much more similar in terms of impact. So that will be a policy question for the village board to think about in terms of how you want to take an approach to debt financing when you are running up against that levy limit and needing to transition more to debt and less reliance on the capital levy.
And Todd, that's really one of the choices they have. I mean, they have other choices, right? I mean, they could decide to
spending.
start doing some cuts, right?
Could reduce your capital spending, you
Yeah.
could reduce your operating expenses, you could choose to go to referendum. You could look at you don't have a wheel tax yet, do you?
No,
Some
look at-
prairie just did a wheel tax. So, those are all on the menu of things that you consider. This is really the easy solution because it doesn't require you to do anything other than borrow, which is within the village board's authority to do. And this simply is that levy projected out under this second scenario. So again, the overall levy is actually less in those out years because of stretching out those costs over time. So to summarize, the village is in a strong financial position. The credit metrics from Moody are just an example of an outside perspective of that. When we look at the levy limit compliant plan, so again, reducing cash levy, moving to the borrowing, over that 5-year projection period, it's not a linear increase because it kind of goes up and down. But our low is 2,341 on that average home and a high of 2,494. So we're, staying in that less than $200 variance for the village component of the overall levy. I would note that does assume that your new construction will be 1.79% annually. So you've got real growth in the tax base that's helping to absorb that. Within the next 5 years, we're assuming that both TIDS 5 and 7 will close as well, which provides, again, additional tax base that pays for that operating and debt service levy. So to the extent that you've got new construction that is more similar to what you've seen over the last 5 years, again, we're using half of that. That impact could be less. If you see a slowdown in new construction, it could be more. Your capital borrowing levels, you're at about 20% of the state limit and 40 in the high point, 48, but you're well within your self-imposed limit. And the big issue that we foresee and the main takeaway from the model is that with that 28 budget, the village will need to make decisions about reducing capital levy, increasing borrowing, or some of these other potential options that we've talked about. But, big picture, the village is in a lot better situation from a levy limit standpoint than most municipalities. You've probably read the articles about the proliferation of municipal levy limit referendums, especially over the last 2 years. And that's because most municipalities don't have that advantage of still having a capital levy that they can start to reduce. So from that perspective, you've got a leg up.
Started small, then whatever.
Correct. So that's an overview of this year's model update, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Paul, you got any questions?
Maybe this is a little bit premature. However, what is the village's stance regarding 2028? Are there any strategies put in place today or any thoughts essentially as we approach the levy limit regarding borrowing or not?
This just recently, we just finished this process, so we haven't had a lot of discussions like Todd and I or anybody, Kristen or anything on what our approach would be then.
Okay.
I mean, I think, since, we'd probably start with some of the borrowing pieces, but we can also look at other options that have been discussed here too. But just knowing that we have that to fall back on.
And historically, has a village been in this position previously and facing the tax levy?
Only to the extent that we've seen this coming now for a few
Sure.
years, but
Okay.
it's, the village has not been constrained by levy limits in
Okay.
prior budgets.
Correct, but we knew this would be coming because, again, the laws haven't changed. And so we keep squeezing out, what I call our cushion. So we're almost to the end of the cushion, and then this would be a new cushion that we would, if we borrowed more, for that. And some of it makes a lot of sense, for our road projects particularly, to start borrowing over the long term, and spreading that cost over the years that the road is being used on. Some of our other equipment things, we would maybe try and find either shorter maturities or do something else with that, because they don't last 20 years. So we don't want to borrow
Sure.
for 20 years for something that's not going to last that long.
The levy limit law exempts general obligation debt payments. I didn't necessarily make that clear, but it doesn't require that the debt be spread out over any certain amount of years to be exempt. So to Renee's point, you could borrow money for squad cars or something like that, and you could repay all that money in the following year or over 2 years, so that you're reducing your interest expense.
Thank you.
Tom, any questions?
I don't have any questions. I think it's going to be, the village board is going to have some decisions to be made about how they're going to proceed with this. And, whether they want to have this committee look at it eventually to help them. I mean, I think we might be happy to do that, but most of it's going to be political. I mean, how are you going to decide whether you want to, start doing all this borrowing, which is a shift from what you've been doing, but that's what a lot of communities do until, then they kind of catch up with that. And then you start thinking about what are you going to do for your operating? And then you have to start thinking about, where are we cutting? Are we going to have to go to referendum to raise raise a levy? Do we work on some kind of wheel tax? What's that called? Automobile something or other. I hate to call it a wheel tax. It's a fee, automobile fee. A local automobile licensing fee. There you go. How's that? But you guys are going to have to make that decision, and we can help give options. And Ellers is real good at doing that too. And I've been involved in seeing this in some other communities and helping advise them. It's not fun, but you got a couple of years to think about it. So, take the time and think about it. There.
So for the 5 to 10 people that are watching this, Tom Wilson just shed a lot of doom and gloom that may or may not happen.
I did not shed doom and gloom. It's just reality, and you're in very good shape because you've got this cushion that you can start to borrow against, which will give you time. But unless the legislature changes the laws, at some point, you're going to have to make some other decisions. That's all.
Thanks, Tom. Kristen, welcome. Okay, classic village president freezing up. We'll come back. Kristen, are you there now? You're muted. We'll come back to you potentially. We're gonna go to Jack.
I have no questions.
All right.
There's Kristen.
I think I unmuted it, thought I was driving. I'm not driving, obviously. I don't have any questions. I'm grateful for the information that we should be planning for 2028. And yes, Tom, I think we do have some decisions as a village board on how we want to approach this so that we can maintain our good financial health over the long term. Thanks, Todd. For the
My pleasure.
presentation and information, yeah.
Thanks, Kristen. I would say, I echo what Kristen had to say. I would say just differently that I look at 2026, 27, 28, 29, 30 and beyond. I think it's important that we do that planning as we look out, not just 27, 28, that those are there. We have to look at the overall picture. And I think this process and this procedure of what we're doing helps us to accomplish that. So thank you. With that, I think that's the last thing on the agenda.
I'll move, we adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn
Second.
and a second. I'll ask the question. All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Thanks, everybody.
Good job.